Hi everyone. I've been so inspired by the winter reading recommendations videos that a lot of you are doing. I'm sure you're probably doing the seasonal videos, the reading recommendations, but for some reason the winter one really caught my attention. I mean, I myself did a fall reads. I think just fall and winter really evoke a certain idea that we might have more time to read because it gets dark at 4:30 p.m. in the US, and maybe we'll have more time to read and do indoor things. So I think that's probably why I think about especially winter reading. It's really caught my attention. And it started me thinking about what kind of books have I just unwittingly turned to in the wintertime, because I don't plan my reading. I don't have a TBR every month, and I'm just not able to do that. I'm such a mood reader, but there are some trends. And certainly when I was a young teenager, I was trying to read like a Dickens in the wintertime. That just seemed appropriate, and I loved it. I loved to be snowed in back in the 70s when we had some big snowstorms in the Pittsburgh area, and read a Dickens or something like that. I took on some pretty large books with Dickens, and I don't think I finished some of them, but it was just fun knowing he was the author of A Christmas Carol to read some of his other stuff. And then I started thinking about these days, like what am I drawn to? And I would say that nothing specific, but I looked back at what I read last year, which was telling. So I'll talk about that here. And then there's some books that I have on my shelf that I haven't read yet that I thought we would just go over. And maybe some of you have read some of these and you could give me some feedback. But one of the things I found on my shelf that I want to dig back into is this book called Winter Hours by Mary Oliver. I'm not into poetry very much, but I do love Mary Oliver and Rilke. There's a really great podcast that Krista Tippett does called On Being, and years ago before, I was going to say before Mary Oliver died, but that's can be assumed. She did an interview with Mary Oliver that is beautiful. I would highly recommend listening to that interview because Mary Oliver does recite some of her poems. This is a book of prose poems, and poems. And she talks about other authors in this book. And specifically in this foreword, she says, Poe, Frost, Hopkins, and Whitman were subjects of interest in classes I recently taught at Bennington College in Vermont, where I now live part of each year. Bennington College? We know what Bennington College is, the college that Donna Tartt attended. But besides that, really cool. I want to get back to this. I haven't picked this up in a couple years. My husband got this for me years ago. It was just this used book that's like a decommissioned library book, and he knows I love Mary Oliver. So, yep, I'm glad I got that down, inspired by all of your videos. Then, the book that occurred to me as far as being able to dig into a long story, like a Dickens story, a Dickens length book, this one. Speaking of Donna Tartt, The Goldfinch. The Goldfinch is a saga. It's a Bildungsroman, roman, and it covers so much time in so many places. I'm sure winter is part of the story, but it feels, the thing I remember about this book when I first started it, I read this started it in December of 2019 and then into the pandemic, was I felt that it had a Dickens feel to it, and I just fell in love from the beginning. So yeah, it's lengthy. It probably has more in it that needs to be in here, especially in the middle, but that's Dickens too sometimes. It's really, really good story to just tuck yourself into for a couple months, taking your time if you want. You can get really lost in this. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize. I don't remember that. So yeah, that's my long, cozy read recommendation. And then I've got to agree with Charles at Seasop on this winter read, Stoner by John Williams. And I'm so glad that I watched his video this weekend because it reminded me of this glorious book. I loved it. I actually have it pulled out of the shelf because I'm going to reread it in December. There's a Booktube event called Remember December. And I will link a couple people that are hosting the event. And it's just to reread books that maybe you haven't thought of rereading. I'm going to reread this one now that I was reminded of it from Charles. And then I'm going to reread, I think I'm going to reread The Bell Jar. I have to see. I haven't touched that book in decades. And so when I get my hands on it, I want to see if now is the time to reread it. But man, I can't wait to get back into this. I read this in the fall of 2022 in a complete blur because I just couldn't believe the writing I was reading. I can't believe I don't have pages marked, but I wasn't really even doing that then. I couldn't believe it. I can't wait to come back to it and see, like, am I still blown away? What's gonna happen? But I'll have more to say about this in the near future. I just remember it being profound because it's about Stoner, is his name John? Going to college. He's in the Midwest and he goes away to college studying agriculture. His family thinking, okay, well, we'll see you back at the farm when you get your degree. And he changes his degree to English. He doesn't even realize he's going to do that, and he does it. And this story is really about his personality and how his traits make some things in life difficult for him. And sometimes he ends up getting into situations that he can't get himself out of just because of who he is. And I just felt for him so much through this whole story. Sometimes I was exasperated, but yeah, I can't wait to dig back into this one. I don't really know if I sold that as a winter read, like atmospherically, but I have to start rereading it first to understand the atmosphere. Then on my shelves, I pulled some things down to remind myself. Some of these could be just the season to read them. Walden by Henry David Thoreau, because goodness knows this book goes through the seasons, and I think the chapters are actually broken down that way somewhat. Where I Lived and What I Lived For, The Village, the Ponds, Brute Neighbors, Housewarming, that must be when he gets his house done. Former Inhabitants and Winter Visitors, Winter Animals, The Pond in Winter, and then he goes to spring. I've never read this. I'm really glad that I've pulled this out as a reminder that I own this. I'm sure I got it at a library sale. I think atmospheric is a good word for this one. Let me know, those of you who have read it. Dickens. The only Dickens that I own, well, I do have David Copperfield, but I looked at that one and thought, well, that's a chunkster. So I didn't pull that down, but certainly, speaking of a long book, I have this one though, Hard Times. It says the backdrop to this campaigning novel is the grim industrial center of Coketown with its belching chimneys, purple-dyed river, and hordes of downtrodden mill hands. It's about a guy named Thomas Gradgrind, sternly preparing his pupils for their predetermined fate as industrial fodder. I don't want to read on. I don't want to know what this is about, really. But that's interesting. I pulled it down because I thought maybe I'll get to this. Who knows? But I wanted to remind myself that I have it. So, yeah, let me know what you think about that one. Then, something I don't know anything about is this one, but it has Christmas in the name. It's a W. Somerset Maugham. It's called Christmas Holiday. And this is one of these books that I picked up for a couple dollars at my library. Not my main library in the city, but my branch library has a little store in it. And it's got a section that has some classics. This is a like shoebox size library store. Closet size, I should say. And there's like a little section on the shelf that is for classics. And this was there along with two other mom books, Cakes and Ale, and something else. Let's see if it says what it is about. Copyright 1939 by W. Somerset Maugham. All rights reserved. What a printer. P.F. Collier and Son, Doubleday, Duran and Company. Wow, what a beautiful... Can you imagine? These were like $2 or $3 a piece. Oh, it was Christmas Eve and he was going to Paris, Charlie Mason. I don't know anything about this book. Might be fun just to dip in. I haven't read a W. Somerset Maugham since I read Of Human Bondage decades ago. So let me know if you've read this. Don't tell me anything about it, of course, but that would be fun. Then one more suggestion that I thought about last night that's sitting right here. Oh, I want to say one other thing. I will be reading, I just happened to see this, I will be starting to read Wolf Hall as my year-long Thomas Cromwell chapter a day, I guess. I don't know the schedule, but it's usually chapter a day with footnotes and tangents. Footnotes and tangents is Simon Hassel's Bookstagram account. So look him up. I will put his channel in the notes because he hosts the War and Peace read-along that I've done all year, and he's doing a Thomas Cromwell, and he's also doing War and Peace. But we're going to start with Wolf Hall. I have that downstairs, and I just happened to find this at a $1 library sale last year. So we'll be moving on to, if this is the second book, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get into Wolf Hall. I've tried over the years, and it just never stuck, so we'll see. But what I wanted to tell you about is this book that I read during the winter time, starting in January of 2022. It took me 3 months, maybe longer, because I only read it at night. And it is Patricia Highsmith's Diaries and Notebooks. So the notebooks were kept for her story ideas, developing the story ideas, and then her diaries were her diaries. And this covers 55 years. It's extraordinary. What I really loved about it is all the traveling she does. As she starts to make some money from getting her books finally published, she does some traveling to, the south of France and to Italy, and she ends up outside of Philadelphia renting a house, and she ends up in Texas, or maybe that's where her mother ends up. Oh my gosh, is this amazing? Oh my, I loved it. And the way that there's the introduction from Anna von Planta tells you, I think she had been her editor at one point, tells you how she went about dissecting and putting together in this book the diaries and journals. She has it segmented into decades. So for instance, the first section is early life in New York and different ways of writing, 1941 to 1950. How much I just loved going through these decades. And when I would get to another decade, like that was something. And every once in a while, she'll add a real page from the diary or notebook. It's a hefty book to be trying to read in bed at night, but I did it. And it got me through. Got me through January and February and March. And by the time I was done, spring was here. It was lovely. I just can't recommend this enough. And it would make a really wonderful present too, for somebody that would enjoy a writer's writing diaries and journals. So yeah. All right. Thanks for joining me. Did I say something about the candle? I think I did already. Yeah, that I lit the candle before this video. This time, if you saw my fall reads video, you'll know what I mean. And this is a candle that my daughter made, and it has a wood wick, and you can hear it crackling like a fire. It's fantastic. All right, well, please join me in this conversation about winter reads, about any of these books here. Let's recap. Oh, yeah, Mary Oliver. I've forgotten already. Mary Oliver, The Goldfinch, a nice long read. Stoner, which I'm going to reread. Walden, Dickens' Hard Times. Somerset Maugham, if I'm pronouncing that right. And Patricia Highsmith, Diaries. Thanks for joining me. And please join in on the conversation in the comments. And let me know what you're reading this winter time. And I hope to see you on the next one.